So you want to build a bigger deadlift, and I'm here to tell you that the single best exercise in the world to make your deadlift stronger is the deadlift. Of course, the law of specificity tells us this. If you want to get good at something, you do more of that thing. But it doesn't mean that this is the only way to improve your deadlift. And at the moment, when we don't have access to a lot of equipment, and maybe you don't even have a bar, there's a certain family of exercises that we can do that are going to ensure that you're not only going to hold on and maintain your deadlift strength, but maybe even increase it. And this family of exercises is the Nordic hamstring lower family. This is a series of exercises, of movements that we can do to create an incredibly strong posterior chain, which of course is super important for that deadlift. It'll strengthen your hamstrings, it'll strengthen your glute max, and it will strengthen your lower back. But before we talk about how to do these exercises and what they actually are, let's talk about some of the science behind them. Now, as with a lot of our recommendations for the types of exercises that you should be doing to stay and to get strong, even with the absence of equipment, we look heavily and we rely heavily on eccentric training. Now, to understand how these exercises work, you need to understand what eccentric exercise is. Your body can do three different contraction types. You can do a concentric shortening contraction, which is where the fibers of a muscle will shorten. You can do an isometric contraction, which is where you're holding a static position. And as is pertinent to what we're talking about today, you can do an eccentric contraction, also called a negative or a lengthening contraction. And this is where, if we look at the example of something like a bicep curl, you are slowing or breaking the movement and fighting against gravity. Now, eccentric training has really far-reaching benefits, not just extending to your strength and fitness, but also to your health as well. In fact, a lot of the research into the strength benefits of eccentric training will actually tell us that you get a 10% increase in strength over what you would with a standard concentric exercise muscle contraction. And the other great thing about eccentric training is it's not that it just increases the height of your strength, so how much strength you have, but it also increases the range over which you're able to develop this strength. Now, of course, if you're looking to improve your deadlift, this can be great because maybe you've got a sticking point, maybe you struggle to break the bar off the ground, maybe you struggle with your lockout. Doing eccentric training for your hamstrings, for your glutes, and for your lower back is going to fatten the curve and make you stronger over a greater range, and therefore start to get rid of some of these sticking points. Now, there are multiple types of eccentric training that we can do, and you may have heard of tempo training. This is where you slow down the speed of contraction, you slow down the speed of a lower, the speed of an eccentric, and then keep the concentric, the standing up phase, fast. So if we were looking at a movement like a back squat, for example, a tempo back squat would be a slow lower, maybe a 5-second lower on that negative portion, maybe a pause at the bottom, and then as explosive as you can on the way up. But this tempo training is not the best form of training, of eccentric training, that you can be doing for strength. The best form, according to the research, is called accentuated eccentric training. This is where you do that slow lowering phase, but then the concentric phase where you're lifting, you actually have some assistance with. So let's say, again, we're using the example of a back squat. It's a slow eccentric lower and then assistance on the concentric phase to stand it back up. What this does is ensures that we are overloading that eccentric phase where all of those strength and hypertrophy benefits are lying. As an added benefit to your joint and musculoskeletal health, eccentric training has also been found to have great effects on your ligaments and tendons, strengthening them to help to prevent future injury, and also acting as a rehab tool to work particularly on tendons to ensure that we're able to return to full strength and full lifting as soon as possible. So this brings me to the 4 exercises that I would recommend that you do to strengthen your deadlift, to maintain strength in your deadlift using eccentric training. Now, all of these are from the Nordic hamstring lower family, and there are 4 different options. In the first option, you will either kneel with someone holding your feet or kneel with your feet tucked under something, and keeping the hip angle fixed, lower yourself slowly towards the ground with the knee, hip, and shoulder all in line. A second variation is a very similar movement, but this is now done single leg. So same movement with either someone holding down, this time a single foot, or your foot under an object. Same movement pattern, hip, knee, shoulder in one straight line, lowering as slow as possible. Our third movement in the Nordic hamstring lower family is now with the knee angle fixed as opposed to the hip angle fixed. Again, with your feet anchored under something, you will keep your knee to your hip, so your femur, your upper leg, on a vertical line, and you will now do the eccentric lower hinging from the hip. And of course, the final member of this family is the same thing done with single leg. Again, a vertical femur, lowering and hinging from your hip, controlling that slow eccentric lower. Now there are three important key elements of these movements, which is going to ensure you're getting as much out of them as possible. The first is that nice, slow, controlled lower. And even if you get towards the bottom of that repetition and start to fall, you should be falling with the handbrake on. And just like driving a car with the handbrake on, it is possible to drive fast, but it's not efficient. We are trying to create that inefficiency. So even when you're falling, fall under brakes. The second key element is concentric assistance. What does this mean? Well, you'll remember I talked about accentuated eccentric training, where you're doing a nice slow lower, but then there is assistance on the way back. So if with any of these variations you are able to lower to the ground and then return back to a vertical starting position with no assistance from your arms or change in body position, you need to add weight to your lower. We want to be doing these at such a weight, at such a load, that you are not able to return concentrically to your starting position using a reverse of the movement that you did eccentrically to lower to the bottom of that repetition. And the final tip to get the most out of these movements is maintain a good neutral body position and a neutral spine. So in the variation where your hip angle is fixed, we want to see your knee, your hip and your shoulder in one straight line as you lower towards the ground. In the variation where your knee angle is fixed and you are hinging at the hip, you want to keep your spine nice and neutral. A lot of people will tend to go into a hyperextension of the lumbar spine and overextension of the lumbar spine as they're doing these movements. Lock the rib cage down, keep your back and your body neutral, and this way it will transfer over effectively not only to your deadlift, but the other foundational human movements that we are looking to improve. And finally, the prescription of reps, of load, of the amount of volume of these movements. There's some really interesting research that shows that even 3 sets of 6 can have a strengthening and a long-term protective benefit for hamstring strength and power. So you don't have to do a lot here. But as with any strength work with a lower rep range, the intensity does have to be high. Now the intensity here is not coming from adding weight or adding speed. On the contrary, the intensity is coming from taking speed away. So even though you're only doing 3 sets of 6 here for a session, really bring that movement speed as low as possible. The slower you're moving, the more eccentric benefit you will start to get. So if you don't have access to a barbell or any equipment, it doesn't matter. No barbell, no worries. There's still plenty of options and plenty of things you can do to hold on to and improve that deadlift strength. I really think you should be including some of these exercises from the Nordic hamstring lower family into your program. I think when you do get back to a heavy bar, you might just be surprised.